Today is May the 18th, 2009. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University Library, and we're conducting an oral history project entitled Oklahoma Centennial Farms. And we're here in Guthrie, Oklahoma with Charles Scrutchfield Nelson of the Scrutchfield Homestead or Farm. Which one? Farms.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for having us today.
You're quite welcome. Nice to have you.
And Juliana Nykolaiszyn is with us also, and she may chime in with a question. So let's get started by having you start with how your family came to own the land.
This particular farm,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather did make the run into Guthrie, Oklahoma on the second train on April 22nd, 89. He did not homestead this farm. He homesteaded further northeast. He first opened a barber shop just about 2 blocks from the railroad depot, which lasted for a short time until he opened his furniture business. And as you might expect, in the early 1890s, a lot of bartering was done instead of payment in cash. And he was quite successful at that. And he had a penchant for raising thoroughbred horses and Shetland ponies. So he was looking for the addition of another farm that would be closer to Guthrie, where he could do that. The farms that he owned in Logan County were all considerable distance away from Guthrie itself. And to have taken care of horses on any of those farms would have meant riding all day and all night just to get there and back. So he was able to obtain this farm, originally 80 acres, 5 acres of which he subsequently sold, and had his horses and Shetland ponies here. This made it a very easy distance for him to ride out on horseback or by buggy to take care of the horses. He wanted 2 things in a farm, and that was clear land so that he would have room for the horses to graze, and natural water source. And just behind this house are 2 forks that commence what is called Bird Creek. And it is spring fed. I can find 2 springs directly behind the house. There might be a third one a little bit north. So he always had water. And that was essentially what he wanted in order to have a place close to town to graze his horses.
Well, when he came in on the train, where did he come from?
He came from the Kansas line. He had been in Missouri and homesteaded, as I said, a little further northeast. He was one of those where as soon as he staked his claim, someone staked one right over it, but he was able to prove his original claim. So he staked on that farm and then opened his businesses downtown.
Did he come by himself, or was siblings or wife?
As far as I know, he came by himself, and my grandmother, his future wife, came on either the first or second train, I'm not sure which. She was a Sturgeon, and the Sturgeon family also homesteaded here. And in fact, I have the original homestead exemption on that one. And he met her sometime between 1889 and 1895. Originally, she was 15 years old when she made the run. Came with 2 old maid spinster aunts who had raised her. Her mother had died just shortly after her birth. And she worked originally as a waitress at the Harvey House at the railroad depot. And then at a restaurant, although I don't know if it was that one, she and my grandfather met, and they were married in 1895.
And they did not live on this land, they lived somewhere else.
Right, they lived in town. Mm-hmm.
And then how many children did they have?
They had 2. My mother, who was the older of the 2, or Scrutchfield Nelson, and then my uncle, Fay Scrutchfield. Of course, few people called him Fay, even though it was spelled with the male spelling without the E. So he became known as Scrutch throughout his life.
And then your parents then had just one son, or?
My mother and father just had the one son, and my uncle and his wife just had one son. So it's just the two sons. My cousin, Fred Scrutchfield, currently lives in Sun City, West Arizona.
So that's how you came to be the owner of this 80 or 75.
Yes, the farm I mentioned earlier, west of town, my cousin inherited personally. I inherited this one personally, and then the balance of the farms and lots and houses we owned jointly.
Well, on this particular farm, were there any structures?
Never a structure that I can recall, never a structure that I have heard about. For a number of years, on the corner where we border on Pine Street, without any formality at all, a baseball field developed. And so for a long time, baseball was played on the field, but there was actually no structure even connected with the baseball area. It was just kind of, the lot is empty, so we'll use it type thing.
Well, over the years, other than horses, has it raised any other crops or products?
Sometime prior to his death, which was in 1927, he had given up the horse business. And then it was rented for pasture. A gentleman named Charles Scrutchfield rented our farm here for probably in excess of 30 years and grew wheat mostly. His widow, Olive Hickson, is 98, still very active in town, drives her car wherever she wishes to go. But many years ago, while my mother was still alive, we changed the lease arrangements and leased to a gentleman named Holly Chapel. And he took the far east end of the farm, the last 100 feet of it, fenced it separately, mowed it, kept it mowed very short, and that was his landing strip for his personal airplane. His home at that time was just on the southeast corner of my property, so he could nearly taxi right up to the back door. And he has continued to lease the area and grow wheat. He no longer flies, so that's how the farm has been used since then.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wish I flew. I could have a very nice arrangement here.
Do you have any idea how much was paid for the farm initially? Any idea?
No, I do not. I would not even swear that it was in currency. It could have been a barter arrangement. So I have really no idea on that.
And so how far are we from town here then?
From Noble Street, where you turned off and headed north, and that is the main east-west thoroughfare through Guthrie, we are 0.8 of a mile.
Okay.
So it did make it close for him to be able to get out to this area to take care of his horses and Shetland ponies.
And did you grow up in Guthrie?
I did after I turned 7. My mother and father lived in Oklahoma City. And of course, my mother grew up here. My father never lived in Guthrie. By the time they married, they were in Oklahoma City. But my mother and I returned here when I was 7, and I've been here ever since.
So you visited the Carnegie Library downtown then?
Quite a few times. Quite a few times. Many people do not know this, but there was a conservatory in the basement of Carnegie Library back in the 1910s. And my mother was quite a pianist and studied a great deal, and she was enrolled in that conservatory. I have newspaper articles on recitals that were given, things of that nature, done in Carnegie Library. And many people were not aware that that was true. But I've got the newspaper articles to vouch for it.
Has the town changed much since those days?
Not the downtown area as far as physical structure, and really not even the population. It is growing, but slowly. This area does have a new housing area that did not exist. It's really the outlying areas outside the city limits directly in Logan County, but outside the city limits, that has really mushroomed with beautiful homes. But the downtown, I'm happy to say, has remained very much the same.
Well, where we are today, this is part of the original farm.
Yes.
How much of it is left like it was?
25 acres of it. Really, to be precise on that, I'd say it's probably more in the range of 35 or 40 acres that are left as it was. This has all changed. We now have housing where there was none before.
Well, when it was used to farm wheat, they would take it to Guthrie to sell, I'm assuming?
Yes, yes.
Most likely by a horse and trailer, or any idea?
Well, by the time we were growing wheat, no, it would have been by motorized vehicle, because that came after 1927,
Okay.
when we were growing wheat.
So you would have been in the area during the Depression?
Yes, yes. it
Any,
was.
anything of interest you want to say about that time period?
Well, we got through it somehow. And Guthrie really didn't change that much actually during the Depression. It was pretty slow then, and it stayed slow after that because the capital had left Guthrie by then.
Was there any cotton grown in the area?
I'm not really familiar with cotton crops around here to know, but I suspect so because there was a cotton refinery here at one time.
Okay.
So I imagine there was, probably on the Cottonwood River up north.
Well, when they were raising Shetland ponies, what was did they sell them, or?
Yes, sold them, and probably because of the fact that we became a state in 1907, and I do not know what the initiative was for this, whether he was asked to do it or volunteered to do it just as an individual recognition. But just after Teddy Roosevelt signed us into being a state, one of the Shetland ponies, it was named Don Pedro, and it was sent to the White House. Now, whether it was sent by the city of Guthrie or by my grandfather individually, I have no records to show. But it was sent as a gift to Teddy Roosevelt. We had a picture of it. It is still somewhere in this house, of Teddy Roosevelt's son sitting in a saddle on the pony on the White House grounds, and Teddy Roosevelt was holding the reins to the horse. But I don't know what instigated him sitting the pony, whether he just wanted to do it or the city asked him to do it or what, I don't know.
Would most people buy them just for family use?
Sure, I was Shetland pony all the time I was growing up here.
You had to come out and do your chores and take care of it?
No, they didn't force me into that.
Did you have farm chores though otherwise?
No,
No.
no,
More of a town
yes,
person?
right. Because the first part of my life was in Oklahoma City,
Sure.
so it was 7 before we came here, and by that time my grandfather died, so we no longer had the Shetland ponies. But we used to have a lot of them.
About how many at one time, do you have any idea?
My mother has told me that he's had as many as 100 Shetland ponies at one time, but I don't know that. But the two that we had, that my cousin had and I had, were not even from his farm because by the time we moved back, we didn't have them anymore.
So they had to have scattered across the state
Mm-hmm.
to have that many,
Right.
and they weren't used as work animals, more just
No,
fun.
and the few full-size horses that he had, he raised as thoroughbred horses. So, and I'm sure he didn't want to give that up, but I think health necessitated it.
So other than that, as his income, he had businesses in town.
Yes. He had furniture business, principally, and ended up with 3 buildings, side by side, 100 block East Harrison. He built the first one in 1895. That was 106 East Harrison. built it as a furniture store, and also made caskets, which was not unusual in that day. And then expanded his business by buying the two-story building next to that, 108 East Harrison. And subsequently, after he died, my grandmother moved from her home, her house at 203 East Violet, moved up to live over the buildings on the second floor and bought the third building. So ultimately, we had 106, 108, and 110 East Harrison. Dr. Michael Bennett has the three buildings now and has restored them and done one magnificent job bringing them back.
So in the third building, what was it used for?
Also for furniture. All three buildings ultimately was furniture, and then for a long while an electric company had the one-story building that he built. And I still have some very interesting documents hanging on the wall in there, in handwriting, of course, from 1895 by the contractor who built the building. How he verified the honesty and integrity of the workmen, how many bricks were actually used in the building, and the ultimate cost of those bricks, which, if I remember, was something like $109.
For the entire building?
Yes.
And where would they have come from? Do you have any idea?
Probably here. Guthrie
Here,
had
the brick
brick
plant.
foundry. I have a picture of one of the two brick foundries that were here. That was here.
I didn't realize they had one, did you?
I think a lot of places did, kind of like Davenport.
Mm-hmm. Well, we did have, and as I say, I have a picture in there. If I recall, it's the one that was nearest the rail depot.
Or they have a lumber yard too? I'm
Oh yes, absolutely.
enough trees in the area to
Yes.
have one.
Until recently, we still had two lumber buildings functioning, but both of those have now closed. But all three of his buildings were built of brick.
A lot of changes, and then not so much, I guess, both ways.
Right. When they remodeled, Dr. Bennett remodeled the two-story buildings, this would be 10 years or less. When they exposed the original I-beam over the front of the building, separating the first and second floor, we were stunned to find that you could still read quite clearly Scrutchfield New and Used Furniture on that I-beam. Even though they painted over it many times over many years, the original was still available.
Took photos.
Yes, yes, oh yes, absolutely. In fact, Dr. Bennett wanted to leave it as it was, but it just would not work right in the restoration, so he had to cover it over.
That's interesting too. I'm glad someone's redoing the older buildings. Yes.
Bringing them back to their original. A major one is being done right now as we speak, and it's on Oklahoma Avenue, so that has us within one or two of all the buildings downtown being the original fronts.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
And the Carnegie Library is still standing.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Absolutely, it's still very beautiful.
Where was the train depot then?
Where it currently is, the first railway depot, I believe, was actually on the west side of the railroad tracks. And I believe it burned down, and then they built on the east side of the tracks. First a wood structure, and then the current brick one. And so it's there right at the end of Oklahoma Street, which is the main drive through the downtown business area.
Well, your grandparents would have been here when the state became a state.
Oh yes, absolutely. My grandfather, according to my mother, attended the ceremony, which was at the Carnegie Library, and he held her on his shoulders so that she could see it. And at the Centennial in 2007, I went, of course, to the reenactment of it and tried very hard to stand in the original place where she had described that he was standing. I went very early in order to do that, but the television stations were all here filming, and a friend of mine mentioned to one of the TV stations that I was trying to stand where my grandfather had at the original, so they wanted an interview. And then the second TV station wanted an interview, and by the time I got finished with it, my space was gone. And I didn't get to stand exactly where I think he was. But in the same general area.
That was exciting times, both times.
Both times it was.
Mm-hmm. Any questions?
Going back to this piece of land, this beautiful piece of land, could you started telling us about, you know, how Shetland ponies are raised, and you made some mention of how it evolved through the years. If you could just detail a little bit more about how we're at this point in its development.
I guess I would have to say it was rather in two distinct stages, because my grandfather's original use for it extended until sometime into the 1920s. At that time, he began leasing it for crops, and that activity held true until really just 10 to 12 years ago. So from a time span of approximately 1925 or so until about 12 years ago, it's been a farm where wheat has been grown for the bulk of that time. And very much of that under the lease to one man. So it really was a very quiet farm for many, many years.
And you mentioned too, there's a creek through it. Was it dammed up at any point to make a pond?
Not originally. We have dammed, I say we, I had really nothing to do with it, but the gentleman has a home on the east side of me, dammed the front part of that creek to make a little pond. But you still have some water flowing from underneath it on the south end. This creek, I suspect, is original to the date of the property. Runs very close to behind my house. Of course, it's quite a drop right behind my house down to the creek bed. But that was one thing he insisted on having, was water, of course, for the horses.
And when it was farmed, did they use any conservation efforts like terracing or any of those?
No, there really wasn't terracing, and this farm essentially was a pretty flat farm. This portion over to Pine Street has not really been disturbed that much. We've done some sloping to it, of course, but it was pretty flat. And then on the other side of the creek beds, it begins to rise to the high point of the farm overlooking I-35.
None of your property was taken for 35 then, if there was
No.
another farm between you
No, I'm
and
happy to say it was not.
you can't hear it too much either from here.
At times, in the evening particularly, you'll hear the semis going by. But by the same token, you can hear the railroad train, which is 2 miles east of us. So it isn't that intrusive.
It's interesting that you chose to have your house here all these years later.
I felt like if it was going to be used for development, I wanted to be part of it by part ownership on it, and was able to do so at a time when I had pretty free reign on what portion of it I selected to build. I liked this particular site because I have the trees and the creek right behind me, and still have somewhat of an overview of Guthrie. So, yes, just the fact that it had always been our farm, I felt like I should be honored if we were going to do any development to it.
And the name of the street in front of the house is?
Nelson Place. Happens to be my last name. Isn't that a coincidence?
That is.
Yes.
Hopefully it'll be here a long time.
Well, at what point was the decision made to go from farming to residential development?
Right at the end of the 1990s. I recall clearly it was just after Christmas, first of the year, and a lifelong friend of mine here in Guthrie and his son contacted me to see if I had reached a point where I was interested in developing it for housing. But he was not the first to ask me. Within a 2-week period, I had 3 developers contact me. One out of Edmond, one out of Oklahoma City, and then the one to whom I ultimately sold. And I felt like that was kind of a, maybe not a warning, but a clue that the time was definitely here to proceed with some development. I felt that were I to not do it, then there are several farms, open spaces, just on the other side of the cemetery north of me or to the northeast. And this property just might be jumped over for those housing developments. And my lifelong friend here and his son made a nice offer, and I knew them, so I felt like that would be a more comfortable situation for me to sell to them. So that's how that developed.
Well, that's great that it's somebody you could trust and, you know, entrust with the land that your family has cared for
Absolutely.
so long.
Absolutely, and they respected that.
Mm-hmm.
They did.
Did you have, we noticed the street, were you instrumental in the layout of the land or the parceling out of spaces or?
No, not actually. That was pretty much designed by the son, and of course with the father's influence and input, I'm sure. The only influence I had on it was that I selected this particular area for my house, which meant whatever road they put in had to take that into account because the house I wanted here. So, and they were very cooperative about that too.
Now, as you drive into this development, you see the Centennial Farm sign.
Absolutely.
And we think that's just a really nice touch.
And that was very much in accord with the father and son who are instrumental in building this. When I made them aware that the farm was being recognized and that the sign was going to be provided, they wanted it right at that time, the only entrance into the property. So I can thank them for having it there.
And they named it Canyon Bluffs
Canyon Bluff Estates, yes.
as opposed to Crutchfield Estates.
As opposed to Scrutchfield, but Scrutchfield is sometimes a difficult name to spell or understand, and you certainly have difficulty getting into those short little signature lines provided on all forms. So yes, he named it Canyon Bluffs.
That's nice though. And you see your grandparents owned other property besides this. How much total acreage at one time did they have? What was the most?
When my grandfather died in 1927, I had the abstract of the information on his holdings at that time. You can tell that he was very good at barbering in those earlier days. In Guthrie, Langston, and 2 other really non-existent townships in Logan County, he owned a total of 365 lots. In Logan County proper, he owned 8 farms that we can verify. My grandmother recalls it being slightly more than that, but we can verify 8 farms, plus a section of land in Texas, a section in Colorado, and a section in New Mexico. And I know the one in Colorado, which was a full section, was bartered. It cost him a span of horses and a carriage to attain it. Then he had the 3 buildings downtown, 3 houses downtown, including the one in which he and my grandmother lived. And those were his holdings at the time that he died in 1927. So while we did not have particularly a lot of cash, he entered, or my grandmother was able to enter the Depression pretty secure.
What became of the land in Colorado and Texas and New Mexico?
My mother, who inherited that one specifically, sold that about 1963. We did retain the mineral rights to it. My cousin and I just recently sold the farm in Colorado, and that was a full section, again retaining the mineral rights. And the one in New Mexico I know very little about. My grandmother always said that there was some legal contention on the part of the United States government on the ownership of it, and she never went into really any detail about it when I was young. I have since found a record where we did pay taxes on that farm back in the late 1920s or early 30s. But that's the only thing I've ever found on that section.
Have you visited any of them?
Both the Texas and the Colorado ones, yes.
Do you know if they did?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if they did?
They did not, no. They may have seen the one in Colorado. They did take a trip up there one time, but he became quite ill while he was there. He was nearing the end of his lifespan at that time, and the doctor told them to return immediately to lower altitude. So they might have seen that one. I doubt it, because I know my grandmother, who was with him, told me that she had never seen it. And until we had a concern with a lease that we had on the Colorado farm, my mother and I had never seen it. But we did go up to resolve the question on a lease and got to see it many years before we saw the Texas farm. And it's in the Panhandle. As you might guess, it's very flat. It is so flat. When you can stand on one corner and see the other three property poles on the section, you know it's flat.
What would the people have leased it for then?
Oh, they were
Cattle, I guess?
growing. No, they were growing wheat. They were growing wheat.
And the Texas one?
That was the Texas one.
Texas one. Okay,
Yes.
Texas.
Yeah.
Well, and the Colorado one, what would they have? What was it been used for?
They were grazing on that farm. That particular farm was sitting right in the center of an area where a gentleman owned, it was either 10 or 11 sections surrounding it, essentially.
Big ranch.
But I'm sure that, in fact, I know that my grandfather bartered for that one by using the span of horses and a buggy or a carriage.
You like to acquire land.
Yes. And he was charmed, very successful at being able to do that.
And pick good quality pieces evidently too then.
He liked water on every farm. The one that did not have it was the Colorado farm. But the farms here, and I have seen most of them over a period of time, did have natural water.
Just all around seems like a very smart businessman and entrepreneur for his time.
I think he was. I think he was.
And he had come from Kansas. Do you know where his people had come from?
Back, I'd say 2 generations before him, they would have come from the Nashville, Tennessee area. A very good friend of mine who lives in Franklin, Tennessee, known him this year exactly 50 years, was researching genealogy on his family in that area. We found from early information that my grandmother had that one of his distant relatives back in the 1600s had the same name that my grandmother's side had on my grandfather's side. So we then seriously researched and found out that we were actually distant cousins. But the Scrutchfields married into the Henderson family in Tennessee and migrated then from Tennessee through Missouri. A portion of the Scrutchfields took very much the same route, but settled in Illinois and the more northern areas. And I come from the strain of Scrutchfields that settled in the Kansas and Missouri areas.
It had to be a little bit adventurous to decide to come for the land run.
I'm sure they were, and it's nice to have contact with anyone who has borne the name Scrutchfield, because you do not find that name easily in a telephone book.
Anything else?
Well, growing up, do you have any fond memories of not only this farm, but the other farms in the area that you could recall? I know you pretty much hung out in the city and...
Pretty much I hung out in the city. I did accompany my grandmother on visits to a couple of different farms in the southeastern part of Logan County. Now, this farm and the farm west of town I saw frequently. And my uncle and cousin and my aunt, of course, lived on that farm for many years. And so we were out there frequently. So that farm I knew best of any of the farms that we had. This one would be next. 2 or 3 of them I actually would have trouble locating.
And family holidays, would you go to the farm?
On the West Farm. Great deal of time on the West Farm. Right.
And do you remember when it received electricity? That particular one?
No, I don't. I know that the house that my grandmother built on that farm for my uncle, her son, was the 3rd house on that particular foundation. There had been 2 earlier houses on it, both of which had been blown away by tornadoes. And the 3rd house stayed. It has lasted. But there had been 2 houses on it during the time he owned it earlier.
Did they have a storm shelter then after that?
No. We're stubborn Oklahomans.
Just build again.
Or maybe not too smart Oklahomans.
2 tornadoes in one spot, that's...
That should give you a sign, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it should. And the 3rd time was a charm though, so...
It is, there's still a home on that foundation now.
Well, I noticed on your form that you graduated from the University of Oklahoma.
Yes.
Any reason why OU instead of OSU? I mean, you're closer up the road.
I am. My class in '49 was probably a little unusual class for Guthrie, in that a more significant portion of the graduating class that planned to go to college went to OU that year. UCO, of course, or CSU as it was then, had the majority of students from Guthrie going to school. But in my particular class, there was quite a number that went to OU.
Well, I'm assuming you
That's
weren't.
unusual.
I'm assuming you weren't interested in agriculture so much, so that's what OSU was primarily at that time.
Well, I think my grandmother had instilled some plans for me to go to school either to OU or UCLA, and my uncle went to OU, and so she was partial to OU. So it ended up that it was OU.
UCLA, that's quite a difference too from here.
Yes, it is. But she was also attracted by that. So, but it ended up at OU, and I received my master's degree in 1954, something like 55 years ago.
You had some of your grandfather's business sense then. Too.
Well, I hope so.
Anything else you want to add that we haven't?
No, I've appreciated this opportunity to visit with both of you. I think the project you're doing certainly has merit. I wish you success with it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure meeting you today and recording your story.
Thank you.